Think about a boy who had no shoes, no dad, no future anybody would care about. Barefoot in the dusty backstreets of colonial Mozambique, kicking up a ball with a wall, pretending he was his hero, Alfredo Di Stefano of Real Madrid. Not many who passed him would have guessed that one day he would be pitting that same hero on the greatest stage in European football and send him walking away with his head bowed. That was Eusébio da Silva Ferreira, the Black Panther, and his life is one of the most amazing adventures in the history of sport. Born on 25th January 1942 in Lourenço Marques, the current Maputo city, Mozambique. Mozambique was then a Portuguese colony, which was ruled by a system that provided less dignity and fewer opportunities to the African population. Eusébio was raised in the poor and overcrowded area of Mafalala, where children played football in the open dirt lots with no shoes. His father was a white Angolan railroad worker, Laurindo Antonio da Silva Ferreira, who died of tetanus when Eusébio was only 8 years old. His mother, Elisa Anisabeni, was a black Mozambican woman who was left to raise 4 children all by herself in the conditions of real hardship. The politics of race and colonialism of the era formed a climate in which a mixed-race, poor African boy had all the structural motives to be unnoticed by the rest of the world. And yet football, ever so, happened upon him. Even before the start of the movie, the audience followed the boy as he played the game and realized that something was not right about him. He was not even given a chance to prove himself, as he was initially rejected and even turned away by Desportivo de Lourenço Marques, which was the local club he supported. Ferroviario also made a trial of him, another refusal. But when he was 12, Sporting Clube de Lourenço Marques, the Mozambican affiliate of Sporting Lisbon, took him in and provided him with his first real coaching, his first football kit, and the stage upon which his prodigal talent could be molded. At the age of 15, a Juventus goalkeeper who had retired became a scout and is reported to have noticed him and made an attempt to persuade his mother to allow him to relocate to Italy. She refused. The clubs of Europe surrounding this wonderful teenager would have to wait, but not long. The road to Lisbon was not easy or smooth. By the late 1950s, Eusébio was now known outside of Mozambique. Benfica, one of the greatest clubs in Portugal, came to purchase him. However, there was one big complication that Eusébio had played in the feeder team of Sporting, and thus, Sporting Lisbon had a legitimate claim of interest over him. What ensued was one of the most sensational transfer scandals in Portuguese football history. It was said that Benfica had smuggled him into Portugal under an alias and hid him for a few weeks until the matter was resolved. He even travelled under a cover name of Ruth Melosso to evade detection. It was a Cold War spy story rather than a transfer of a footballer, and it was addressed to the incredible lengths Benfica were going in order to acquire one teenager in a colony who had hardly stepped out of his neighbourhood. The politics surrounding it could not be avoided either. This was Salazar in Portugal, an authoritarian nation that ruled its African subjects with an iron fist, and the migration of the black Mozambicans to the Portuguese mainland was fraught with its own set of complicated and exploitative aspects. The first time Eusébio played in the field at Benfica was in May 1961, in a friendly match against Atlético Clube de Portugal, where he scored a hat-trick. He was first spotted training by the coach of the club, the legendary Hungarian coach Béla Gutmann, who, on seeing him, is said to have turned to his assistant and shouted, "It is gold! It is gold!" The captain of Benfica, the teenager himself, José Aguas, observed him during this initial session, and he willingly volunteered to give the teenager a place in the starting lineup. It was that at once apparent. That rarity, undisputable superiority, which requires no advocacy.
His ascendancy at Benfica was no gradual process,
It was volcanic. During his first full season, he assisted the team in winning the Portuguese Cup. But it was the 1961-62 season that would make him a legend for life. Benfica were the defending champions of the European Cup, and their final opponents, in Amsterdam, were none other than five-time champions Real Madrid, which featured Ferenc Puskás and Alfredo Di Stefano, two of the most decorated players in the world. By half-time, Real Madrid had surged to a 3-2 lead, with Puskás having scored a hat-trick. Then followed the second half, and Eusébio. The 20-year-old went ahead to tear the best team in the world. He registered 2 goals with a penalty, and Benfica swept to an incredible 5-3 win. A backstreet Maputo kid had stolen the crown of the old guard of European football. Having finished the match, Eusébio went to Di Stefano and requested his shirt. He received it and kept it a secret so that no one could take it away. Decades later, Di Stefano would look back and comment, "Eusébio will always remain the best of all time to me." A friendship made in defeat, a reciprocity of respect which endured till the death of both men. In the 1960s, Eusébio was the star of Portuguese and European football. He was the Portuguese league leading scorer, the Bola de Prata, 7 times in his career, and this is unbelievable. He won 11 Primeira Liga and 5 Portuguese Cup trophies with Benfica. He took European Cup finals in 1963, 1965 and 1968. 3 times the trophy eluded him, and this too added to the poetry of his tale. In 1965, he was the winner of the Ballon d'Or, the best footballer in Europe, and became the second-place winner in 1962 and 1966. He was the first ever recipient of the European Golden Boot in 1968, after scoring 42 goals in one league season, which he would repeat in 1973 with 40 goals. During his prime, he is said to have run 100 meters in a record time of 11 seconds. It was not incorrectly said that his right foot was a weapon. But nothing had gripped the imagination of the world as much as the World Cup played in England in 1966. Portugal had never before competed in the top 3 in a World Cup, and the expectation was not high. Instead, the tournament was offered a one-man demolition act. Eusébio became the highest goal scorer of the tournament, with 9 goals in only 6 games, a feat that is still the all-time best goal scorer in a World Cup by a Portuguese. It was during the quarter-final match against North Korea that his genius was crystallized in front of a world audience. It was one of the biggest shocks the tournament had ever witnessed, as Portugal were 3-0 down after only a quarter of an hour. Eusébio replied by scoring 4 goals himself, and Portugal won the game 5-3, in a comeback that is still considered one of the greatest in the history of the World Cup. Portugal was beaten by a slender margin in the semi-final at Wembley by the hosts and eventual winners, England, with Eusébio getting a consolation penalty. He was caught on camera walking off the pitch in tears, a human, crude, but still a human picture that was to remain as one of the iconic pictures of the tournament. Portugal won the third-place playoff over the Soviet Union, and Eusébio scored the first goal off the penalty spot against the great Lev Yashin. He took home the Golden Boot and the Bronze Ball, and left England with no doubt of being the star of the competition. He scored 41 goals in 64 international games with Portugal, a record which lasted 25 years. It was not the goals, nor the trophies, but it was who he was as a man that made Eusébio rise above his contemporaries. Eusébio was a humble man in a sport where ego is so frequently the companion of greatness. He paused the game to congratulate the goalkeeper, Alex Stepney of Manchester United, when his shot was miraculously saved in the final seconds of the 1968 European Cup final, with Benfica winning, and this act of sporting generosity astounded the audience and became a legend. The people surrounding him referred to him as a warm personality. someone who was available to everyone, and one who respected his opponents and fans equally. Although he has had to put up with racial discrimination in the course of his career, he had reportedly earned less than his white colleagues at Benfica during most of his career, but he himself hardly ever discussed it in public. He did so with great dignity. That colonial system that had tried to make him unseen had rather given rise to one of the most celebrated human beings that ever played the game. Eusébio played well into his late 30s after a serious knee injury in 1974 derailed the final chapter of his career at Benfica, appearing with clubs in North America and in smaller Portuguese teams such as Rhode Island Oceaneers, Boston Minutemen, Las Vegas Quicksilver, New Jersey Americans, and Toronto Metros Croatia. It was not the culmination of his talent merited in the way of pomp, but it was typical of the man who just loved to play football, no matter where it took him. He retired in 1979 with 733 goals in his 745 matches in his career. Eusébio was one of the most recognizable ambassadors of the sport after his playing days. He also worked with the Portuguese Football Association. He was present in big tournaments, at charity events, and remained an inspiration to all generations of Portuguese players to come. The man who is later to become the record holder of numerous national records in Eusébio's name, Cristiano Ronaldo, has on many occasions mentioned the debt of the Black Panther generation. In 1992, a statue of him in bronze was erected by Benfica outside the Estádio da Luz. In 2019, Pope Francis pointed to Eusébio as an example of perseverance to the young people of the world when he visited Mozambique. He topped the IFFHS poll of the greatest footballers of the 20th century with a ranking of 9th, World Soccer Magazine with a ranking of 10th, and on the FIFA 100 list of the greatest living players released in 2004 by Pelé. The Portuguese Football Federation declared him the golden player of the country, the most outstanding footballer of the last 50 years, in November 2003. Eusébio passed away on January 5, 2014, in the home of Lisbon, aged 71, due to heart failure. The Portuguese government announced 3 days of national mourning. In July 2015, his remains were transferred to the National Pantheon in Lisbon, which is the place of only the greatest personalities in the history of the Portuguese nation, the supreme honor of a posthumous honor. The same hall had found the boy who had been disowned by a local football club in colonial Mozambique, with kings and poets. His story is not simply that of a footballer who scored goals. It is the story of how a child born into poverty, shaped by colonialism, separated from his father at 8 years old, smuggled across a continent under a false name, and sidelined by the racism of his era, rose to become the defining symbol of an entire nation's footballing identity. It is a story about what talent, determination, and decency can produce, even when the world does everything in its power to suppress them. And decades after his last game, the statue outside the Estádio da Luz still stands with its arm raised, pointing forward, as Eusébio always did, toward the goal.